Hello, good evening. Welcome to another step along the road. The road we're taking our walking tour through the Bible, and we're in the middle of the book of Genesis. We're in the middle of the stories about Jacob. Now, you know how he diddled his brother Esau out of his inheritance, and then he had to flee, and then he went to his uncle Laban, and there he found two wives. And Jacob, being a rather dodgy character, had the misfortune to run into a rather worse character than himself, namely his uncle Laban, and his uncle Laban made him work 14 years for his two wives. And remember, he gave him the wife Leah when he'd promised him Rachel, and then made him work longer for Rachel. Anyway, then of course Jacob goes back and he has a big quarrel with Laban, and then he eventually goes back and he meets up with his brother Esau, who he was so cruel to. But the bit I want to focus on is chapter 32, verses 23 to 33, just 10 verses. And this is where Jacob has some sort of religious experience. You might just like to have a look at it. So what happens in these 10 verses? He gets up in the middle of the night and he takes his wives and his slave girls and he crosses the stream and sends all his possessions over too. After he had taken them across the stream, then Jacob was left alone. So he sends forward his entire retinue of people. That's two wives, two slave girls, lots of children, lots of camels, and so on and so forth. He was left alone. And then he becomes very strange. Now, this is very much reminiscent of what happens to Abraham in one of the scenes where the covenant is reiterated with Abraham, where it talks about a holy fear falling upon him in the middle of the night. Then someone wrestled with him until daybreak. Well, it's often portrayed as an angel, and we'll see why, who, seeing that he could not master him, struck him on the hip socket, and Jacob's hip was dislocated as he wrestled with him. He said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The other said, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he replied. He said, "No longer you to be called Jacob, but Israel, since you have shown your strength against God and men and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked, "Please tell me your name." He replied, "Why do you ask my name?" With that he blessed him there. Jacob named the place Peniel, because "I have seen God face to face," he said, "and have survived." And so off he limps. So Jacob is left with a limp as a permanent reminder of his wrestling with God. But what does this mean? It's a very mysterious passage. Is it some sort of mystical experience? We don't know. Well, actually, this story, then it goes on to say, that is why, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the thigh sinew, which is at the hip socket, because he'd struck Jacob at the hip socket on the thigh sinew. So it's a just so story, doubly so. First of all, why you don't eat this thigh sinew, because that's where God struck Jacob. Well, that's one thing. And the second thing is, what is the etymology of the word Jacob? The one who has shown his strength against God, the one who's wrestled with God. So an Israelite boy could say, "Why are we called Israelites, and why aren't we eating that bit of the animal?" And the father could reply on both grounds, giving them this story. It's a just so story. But clearly there's something happened, and the writer of the book of Genesis, or the writer of the original story, writes in a rather different mode to all the other stories which frame this story, the story of essentially the extended family quarrel. Because Jacob versus Esau, Jacob versus Laban, Rachel versus Leah, who are sisters, and so on. And of course, eventually we'll see in the next set of stories the terrible quarreling that goes on between Jacob's 12 children, 12 sons, and of course the fate of his daughter. So but this stands out. Who is this person who comes and wrestles with him? Why does Jacob stay behind on that side of the stream, send everybody ahead? Is Jacob going to spend the night in prayer? Jacob doesn't really give you the impression of being a man of prayer, does he? He is the chosen of God, but his relationship with God hardly seems mystical. Yet at this point, we do see a touch of mysticism. Someone wrestled with him until daybreak. It seems almost that Jacob is having some sort of, I think I would put it, some sort of fit, some sort of unconsciousness, some sort of extra body sensation, extra body experience. Somebody comes and wrestles with him. He's having a vision. That, I think, is the only thing that can explain this. That Jacob is having a mystical experience. He's having a vision. We're not visionaries, are we? You and I, all of us watching this, we're not visionaries. We don't have visions. We go into church and we see the church just as it is. We go to Mass and we see the Mass as just as it is. We don't have this holy dread fall upon us. But, as I said last time, I think, we are people who live under the shadow of the visionaries and of the mystics. We're aware that such things happen, such things are possible. They may not happen to us, but they certainly can happen to other people, though they happen but rarely. And he says, "What is your name?" And the person, he wants to find out what he's encountering. The person he's encountering, of course, is God. And he says, I won't tell you my name, but what he does say is he asks, "What is your name?" But God says to him, "No, I'm giving you a new name." We often ask God, "Who are you? What do you want from me?" And God tells us, and he gives us a new name that we receive, let's say, in our confirmation or our baptism. And that new name contains in it the seed of our vocation, if you like. You have wrestled with God. You've shown your strength against God. Please tell me your name. Why do you ask my name? And of course, it can't be said. It's the name of God is too holy to be mentioned. And God, I've seen God face to face. So I think this little episode, this rather great episode actually, is a sign of prayer. Seeing God face to face is what we want to do in prayer. We want to struggle with God. We want to get close to God. We want to find out about God. Jacob holds God down, and God is the one who says, "Please let me go because it's soon going to be dawn." So he passes the whole night in prayer. Pascal, the very famous philosopher, once had a night of mystical prayer, which he called the night of fire. And I think this is Jacob's night of fire. So Jacob seems a very worldly man, a rather bad man, a rather slippery man a lot of the time. But he's also somebody who has come close to God and who's seen God face to face. And we, no matter what our drawbacks and our limitations, we too are called to be people who see God face to face. So let us seek the Lord while he is still to be found. Let's not miss any opportunity we may have to see God face to face. Who knows what will happen if we truly seek him? All the best. Good night. Bye.